Well, last night and the night before that, heavy topic. In fact, last night it was almost the entire show. We talked about secession. Inevitably, I mean, the hosts of Free Talk Live tend to be heavily in favor of secession as an idea, as a concept, something that we want to see more of around the world. And I feel like I'm safe in saying we on this one, Daryl. You would agree with that, right?
Certainly. And I support secession so much that even if the state of New Hampshire were to ever secede from the federal government, I think that you should be able to secede from the state of New Hampshire.
Yes.
And anybody renting, from you could, theoretically try to, not be part of your secession in whatever way you guys could work that out.
Yeah, the more secession, the better. The more decentralization, the better. Unfortunately, it looks like, at least if you believe that the polls weren't tampered with
now,
in Scotland.
I've seen stories that, there's vote fraud allegations. I saw a picture online last night where somebody was able to take a picture of stacks of ballots, and the table had a big sign that said no, and some of the ballots that were on top of the stacks had been clearly marked yes.
Oh, my.
So there is going to be, some kind of investigation into whether or not there was vote fraud in Scotland.
Yeah, I don't know what that's going to result in. I mean, obviously, the people who are in power have a serious interest in keeping that power, and I imagine that no matter what the investigation turns up, it'll be all said and done for, at least this time around. But what will it take? I don't know what the process is in Scotland for them to come to put this up again for another vote. Because just for listeners that don't know, if you're just tuning into the show for the first time, Scotland, the voters there, very high voter turnout, 85, 90% in some of their precincts, generally across the board, from what I've seen.
I think I read that the average turnout was 84.4% overall.
That sounds right. So lots of people coming out to vote on this issue of should Scotland leave the United Kingdom. And it had been something that has been in the works for quite a long time.
3 years.
You could also say hundreds of years as well.
Right.
I guess,
well,
but yes.
When I say 3 years, the referendum was approved by British Parliament 3 years ago.
That's interesting. I didn't know it had to go through Parliament to get approved.
Yes. It had to go through Parliament. And Alex Salmond, who's the leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party, had actually, at the time, 3 years ago, requested that more autonomy be one of the options instead of just
total secession.
Total secession, or nope, we're staying. He requested some sort of autonomous, sort of territorial status type thing. British Parliament shot that down. And within the last couple of months, really within the last 4 weeks, the British Parliament had been telling the people of Scotland, if you vote no, we'll give you more autonomy. And Alex Salmond kept pointing out, hey, wait a second. I requested that be an option on the ballot 3 years ago, and you said no.
Wow.
So I think a lot of people sort of decided to vote no. Well, they're going to give us more autonomy if we vote no, and that's what we really wanted all along. So I think a lot of people,
that's speculative.
They bought the bribe of we'll have a little bit more freedom instead of no longer bowing to the Queen.
That's a speculation on your part, obviously.
Pure
speculation. You've seen some sort of poll about that.
I've read several polls. I've read a lot of. I've been reading a lot of British news about the Scottish secession vote, and several of the people that were interviewed in a lot of these articles had said, I was leaning in favor of voting for, and now that they're saying that we're going to get more autonomy, I'm leaning towards voting no.
So I do have some numbers from a post-referendum Scotland poll. Ooh. They talked to over 2,000 adults who did vote in the referendum. They were interviewed either online or via telephone. Online was over 800 of the respondents, telephone 1,200 of them. on the 18th and 19th of September. And it came out with some interesting results. The final tally, I'd actually, let's see, looks like it was 55% voting no. Actually, this was in the poll. This was in the poll, not the actual results. Do you happen to have that handy?
I believe it was 54.5%, almost 55%.
So the exit poll was correct. We had talked last night about what the lone exit poll, I think it was the YouGov poll that they were doing. It showed approximately 54% voting for no, voting no, we're going to stay in the United Kingdom. But things get interesting when you start breaking down the ages.
55.3% was the final number as reported by the UK Guardian.
So things get very interesting when you break down by age range. Looks like people over the age of 65. Take a wild guess at what they voted.
They voted to remain kneelers.
They sure did. In fact, 73% of those over the age of 65 voted to stay in the United Kingdom, with only 27% voting to leave the UK, which you'd think that older folks would know just how bad the United Kingdom was for Scotland.
Right, but they're so old, they don't want change.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, they're so used to using the pound, and the Brits told them, you know, if you guys leave, you can't use the pound anymore. Oh, I don't want to have to change my money because I've always used this with the Queen on it.
Whatever will we do?
Now, what I would love to see in one of these sort of referendums is anyone voting for independence should no longer be, deemed a subject or citizen of the country that they are wanting independence from.
That'd be awesome.
Only the people that vote in favor of remaining part of the country are then still considered citizens of the country that they want to belong to.
Well, that'd be awesome. That would be essentially a vote of personal secession.
Right. So then the 44.7% of people that voted yes for independence would no longer be British subjects.
According to the age breakdown, after you go back from 65 years, so you go to the 55 to 64 range, 43% voted yes in that case. So still a good portion of the 55 to 64 folks voted no. 57% voted no. They wanted to stay in the Union. But then once you go earlier in the age range, 45 to 54, 52% voted yes. 35 to 44, 53% voted yes. 25 to 34, 59% of 25 to 34-year-olds voted yes. They wanted to leave. Then there's the only 48% in 18 to 24 voted yes. And again, how many people they actually interviewed of the 2,000 adults who were 18 to 24, I don't know. But then 16 to 17. Apparently you can vote at age 16 and 17 in Scotland.
This was the first time that they let people under the age of 18 vote in Scotland.
Interesting. Well, it turns out this is a big number here. 16 to 17-year-olds, 71% voted yes to leave the United Kingdom, with only 29% of 16 and 17-year-olds voting no. So if you chop off the 65-plus numbers and chop off the 55-plus, you would have had likely a yes vote. You would likely have had secession in Scotland.
And then the largest city of Scotland, Glasgow, voted 53.5% yes, with a turnout of 75%.
So I hope this isn't over yet. I hope this comes back again, because the more times they can put this up, the more people can become aware of it, the more discussion can happen, the more old people can die off. Right now, Scottish independence happens to be on our minds still. Turns out it didn't quite play out the way the yes voters had hoped it would. It was a close race, with 55% voting no, that they wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. Apparently, there's actually somebody tagged me in something on Facebook. Eddie Free actually tagged me in something on Facebook where apparently some hooligans, some racist skinheads are out in the streets making a big lot of noise over in Scotland right now.
And apparently trying to incite the pro-independence crowd into violence.
Into fighting, yeah. And so they're just a nasty group. Apparently the skinheads in Scotland are in favor of the Union. So if you want to side with racist skinheads, you would be in favor of keeping the United Kingdom together.
And one thing that I think is interesting, looking at the election results, of the 32 districts in Scotland, only 4 of them went yes.
That's not a lot.
That's not a lot, but it just shows you how close the election results were in all of the districts, to where it's still, basically 45 to 55%, and only 4 of the districts were yes.
As we pointed out earlier as well, younger people more likely to, people under the age of 55, more likely to vote yes, let's leave. In fact, really young people, 16 to 17, 71% of them voting yes. So again, give it another 20 years, give it another 10 years, and you may see that this will become a success. We're going to your calls and thoughts. We've got Mark. He's on the line in St. George, Utah, listening to KZNU. Hey, Mark, you're on the air.
Yeah, well, my thing is, okay, if they voted yes, it would just be like Yugoslavia. They voted yes, but it didn't matter because they got invaded by Russia anyway. So would Britain do the same thing? I almost wonder, because this is all part of this European Union, which is really a amalgamous, just group that you don't really know what they're going to do one day to the next. I mean, they think that they have control over the people, but once the people show that they have control, all of a sudden they're like, no, we got to show the people we have control.
I'm not real sure what you're getting at.
Like it works in Europe.
I'm a little confused.
What I'm getting at is the fact that, Yugoslavia voted to be independent away from Russia. That's what they did. Now, do you think that if Scotland were to do that, Britain would have just let them go and they would have been nice? No, they would have been all about stopping the banking unions, and they would have stopped about all kinds of other things, NATO and all the rest, try to make as hard a decision that they made even harder.
Well, I think that you would probably see. I think you would probably see some political movements on the part of Britain, but I don't think that you'd see them bringing in troops or anything like that.
Especially since it was the British Parliament that authorized this referendum in the first place. So it would make absolutely no sense for British Parliament to authorize a referendum and then order the military to go invade the area that they just allowed to secede.
We, as the United States government, are going to recognize these people's independence votes, but not the independent vote in Ukraine?
I would recognize anybody who votes
this one and not that one.
I would vote. I would recognize.
We don't seem to be recognizing the other one in Ukraine.
I recognize anybody who wants to be independent. I don't know. I mean, I'm not part of the government.
The government doesn't seem to recognize the independence vote in Ukraine.
Right, because
what the Russians are doing there.
Because it's not politically beneficial for the U.S. government to recognize the South Ossetia and Transnistria and Abkhazia and all of these other separatist movements that have some level of autonomy.
I don't think that the U.S. government supported Scotland leaving either, if I'm recalling correctly.
They did not.
We don't know. What are the separatist units that wanted to be part of Britain in Scotland? And in what were the groups there? Otherwise, they got a big voice, obviously, because you say how many units or how many counties or whatever voted for and how many voted against. It seems overwhelmingly that most of the people in the rural areas, just like it is, I'm in Utah, we all just feel like the left coast or the right coast controls us in the middle.
So what are you going to do about it?
We can't. We just have to survive. 95% of the land in the state of Utah is controlled by the federal government. So what do we got? We got nothing, really.
You guys don't have a secession movement out there?
Bundy was fighting his head against, man.
You guys don't have a secession movement in Utah?
No.
That's too bad. You ought to start one.
Well, there are individuals and groups that are starting to look that way, but for the most part, there is a overwhelming religious group that just has a majority, and we just kind of have to go along with that unless, I like to stick my toe in the big hole. So, hey,
Thanks. Mark, I appreciate your call tonight. Thank you, sir. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but 733. If you're just tuning in, well, the news out of Scotland, not the best. Not the best news. 55% voting to stay in the United Kingdom. It's a bummer, but, that's the way the cookie crumbles, at least the first time. And, for the first vote, it's not a bad turnout. It's not a bad result, I would say.
Not bad at all, especially when you consider that about 2 months ago, it was a 22-point differential in the opinion polls.
But more than 2 months ago, it was an even wider gap. I think it was like 70% were for staying in earlier this year. So it's really shifted over the last year that people have had the chance to persuade their friends and family members on this issue. As we saw in the breakdown here from ZeroHedge.com, there was a post-referendum poll that found that younger people were more likely to vote yes to secede. People over the age of 55 more likely to vote no. In fact, 65 plus, 73% of them voting no. 55 to 64, 57% voting no. And then once you go below the age of 55, you start getting yes votes in almost every category except for 18 to 24. The 18 to 24-year-olds, 48% voted yes, but again, that's pretty close. And if you average in the rest of the age ranges under 55, it would have been yes had those older folks not been in the game. That doesn't mean that I wish those people were dead. Somebody called in and said that you're not peace-oriented because you're wishing the deaths of people. No, I just acknowledged that older people are going to die off sooner than younger people, and the statistics show that younger people support secession. So I just want to see that happen because I think it's good for the world.
Right, and just to be clear, and I don't want to speak for you, Ian, but at least where I'm coming from, even if the majority of people in Scotland would have voted to leave the United Kingdom, I think that those people that voted to remain part of the United Kingdom should be allowed to remain British citizens.
Why not? Yeah, if they want
while living in Scotland, if that's what they want.
Sure, if they want to keep paying taxes to the crown, they should be able to, right?
Right.
Why would I want to stop them from doing that? It's just that the people who don't want to be a part of that scam and that scheme anymore should be able to opt out, which is why I support personal secession. So there's some more interesting numbers here, and then we'll actually get into some statistics about Americans' support of secession, because last night we shared a poll that we'd shared in the past, September of 2013 poll that showed that about 21% of Americans were in favor of the idea of states having the right to secede. That didn't mean they would vote for it. It just meant that they favored that right of a state to secede. So there's been a new poll that's come out literally just today or yesterday, and we have those numbers. But in the post-referendum Scotland poll, there's some more interesting breakdowns here. Number 4 on this question, they interviewed over 2,000 adults who voted in the referendum the other day. Question 4 was, would you be reluctant in any way to tell your friends, family, or colleagues how you voted? The majority of the voters, 89% of the yes voters, said they would not be reluctant. 86% of the no voters said they would not be reluctant to tell their friends. 5, I'm going to read out 3 reasons people have given for voting yes. Please rank them in order of how important they were in your decision, even if there were other reasons that were important to you. The 70% of yes voters said the most important reason was the principle that all decisions about Scotland should be taken in Scotland. 70% of yes voters said that was their most important reason. 20% said that on balance, Scotland's future looked brighter as an independent country, and 10% of them said that independence would mean no more conservative governments. Number 6 was another similar question, but for the no voters.
And there, just for the sake of clarification, conservative there is with a capital C, meaning conservative party, not necessarily conservative ideology.
Number 6 on the question was for the no voters. Same question. What was the most important reason of these options as far as why you voted no?
I hate William Wallace.
47% of no voters said they voted no, most importantly because the risks of becoming independent looked too great when it came to things like the currency, EU membership, the economy, jobs, and prices. 27% of them voted no because a strong attachment to the UK and its shared history, culture, and traditions. And 25% voted no because a no vote would still mean extra powers for the Scottish Parliament together with the security of remaining part of the UK, giving the best of both worlds.
What was the percentage on that third one?
The third one, 25%.
Okay, and that's, as I speculated earlier, that a lot of people were voting no because of the promises by the British Parliament of, if you vote no, we'll give you more autonomy.
Yeah, so 25, so a quarter of no voters, that was their motivation. So there you go. Your speculation was correct. And then finally, number 7, if it turns out that a majority has voted no in the referendum, which is what it turned out, for how long do you think the question of whether Scotland should be independent or remain in the UK will remain settled? Yes voters, 45% of them said it will be settled for the next 5 years, and 20% of no voters said it will be settled for the next 5 years. 16% of yes voters said for the next 10 years, 18% of no voters for the next 10 years, and so on. So I think it's been fascinating to watch. It's disappointing, obviously, that it didn't go through. And I'm wondering, will this come up again? Will it take another 5 years for this to come up again? Could it be another 2-3 years? When will we see this question again? Because I suspect
I'm thinking maybe 10.
I suspect this isn't over in Scotland.
I don't think it's over, but I don't think it's going to be less than 5 years. I think 10, somewhere between 5 to 10, I think is a safe estimate.
Also, another interesting question, number 2 on this list, is when did you finally make up your mind on how to vote in the referendum?
Ooh.
Of the no voters, 72% of them knew that they were going to vote no longer than a year ago, and or I always have known how I would vote. So 72%. 10% of them was longer than a year. 62% says I have always known how I would vote. So the people who didn't want to change anything were, they'd always been that way. But the yes voters were more undecided until the last month, week, few days, last day. So 52% of yes voters made a decision since the beginning of the year, or in the last month, or in the last week, or so within the last year. 48% knew how they were going to vote longer than a year ago or have always known. So the I've always known how I would vote category, only 38% of the yes voters always knew that they supported independence. So that's a significant chunk. That's 62% of the yes voters who didn't know. They didn't know up until basically the last year or two.
Right, and as I had referenced earlier, it was within the last 2 months that the 22% gap was narrowed to where basically it was a 5-point swing. Had 5% of the voters gone the opposite way, then the results would have turned out different. And a lot of that had to do with the televised debates in which Alex Salmond just completely demolished the we have to stay with England supporter who was up there, telling all the people the fearful reasons of here's all the bad things that will happen if we Scots decide to leave.
In fact, if you tally it up, you talked about the last 2 months. They break it down. It's since the beginning of last year, or excuse me, since the beginning of the year, in the last month, in the last week, in the last few days, and on referendum day. If you look at the yes voters there and you tally up day of, last few days, last week, and last month, you get, looks like 8 and 7, 15, 6, 21, plus 18. So about 40% actually made their decision within the last month to go ahead and vote yes for secession. And that says to me there's a lot of persuasion that can still be done.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who, were on the fence right up until the last minute. This isn't a done deal.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.